The inspection began, as all things in Ridgeview Estates did, with the polite, unyielding pressure of a clipboard. It was a perfect Saturday morning on May 1st, the kind of suburban spring day that smelled of freshly cut grass and distant barbecue grills. I was on a stepladder, applying a final coat of linseed oil to the new barn doors, when her shadow fell across the sawdust-dusted ground. "Mr. Truble." The voice was crisp, devoid of warmth, like the rustle of dry leaves. I turned, my hand still on the heavy pine. Draw Ellingsworth stood on the edge of my newly laid gravel path, a position that kept her technically off my private lawn, but assertively within my personal space. She was flanked by Gerald Finney, a portly man whose perpetually anxious expression suggested he was her reluctant squire. Both wore white polo shirts embroidered with the Ridgeview Estates HOA crest, an oak leaf encircled by the words Ordo et Pulchritudo, order and beauty. Draw's clipboard was angled just so, a shield and a scepter. "Good morning. Draw, Gerald." I greeted them, my voice deliberately calm. I had learned early that any show of emotion was a resource she would eagerly exploit. "The Architectural Control Committee is conducting its semi-annual community review," she announced. Though we both knew this visit was anything but routine, her eyes, small and sharp, bypassed me and fixed on the structure behind me. The barn. My barn. It was a modest post and beam construction, 40 by 60 feet, painted a deep, satisfying shade called Heritage Red. It was where I planned to finally launch the business that would get me out of my soul-crushing corporate project management job, Truble Restorations. A workshop for breathing new life into forgotten furniture. It was my future, built with my own two hands on the back acre of my own private lot. "The color," Draw began, tapping her pen on the clipboard. "Heritage Red is not on the pre-approved palette. As you know, the approved tones are exclusively in the earthen family sandstone, river rock, and forest floor." "I'm aware of the palette for homes, Doctor," I said, descending the ladder and wiping my hands on a rag. "But this is an outbuilding." I checked the governing documents before I started. "There's no specific color requirement listed for detached structures." "An oversight we are in the process of rectifying," she said smoothly. "However, the more pressing issue is the structure's placement. It appears to violate the view corridor easement as described in Section 8.4.2 of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions." Gerald nodded vaguely, avoiding my gaze and focusing on a distant bird feeder. This was the opening salvo I had anticipated. "There is no view corridor easement on my property, Doctor," I stated, keeping my tone informational, not confrontational. "I have the official plat map from my closing, as well as a new survey I commissioned last month to confirm the property lines before I broke ground. My lot, number 114, is not encumbered by any such easement." I was prepared. My wife, Sarah, thought I was being paranoid. But I had a feeling Draw's long-standing silence about my property, one of the few on the street that was grandfathered in and not technically part of the HOA, was a temporary peace. When the first shovel of dirt had turned for the barn's foundation, I knew I had woken a sleeping dragon. Draw's smile was a thin, bloodless line. It didn't reach her eyes. "The board interprets the spirit of the covenants to apply to all properties within the visual scope of the community to maintain architectural harmony. It's a matter of aesthetics and preserving property values for everyone. We believe Section 8.4.2 provides sufficient grounds for review." "I appreciate the board's diligence," I said, parroting a phrase I had heard her use 1,000 times. "But my property is not subject to a discretionary interpretation of a non-existent easement. I have the county-approved plans right here. Permit number B 2023-4815. It's fully compliant with all municipal and county codes." I gestured toward my garage, where the thick file of documents sat ready. She waved a dismissive hand. County permits are a baseline, Mr. Trubel. They don't supersede the community's established standards. You can expect a formal notice from the board outlining our concerns and the required remedies. With that, she turned, her orthopedic walking shoes crunching on the gravel with an air of finality. Gerald offered a weak, apologetic shrug before scurrying after her. I watched them retreat down my driveway, two white-shirted soldiers of conformity, and felt a dull, metallic thrumming behind my ribs. This was not about the color of my barn. This was about jurisdiction. It was about control. And it was just the beginning. That evening, the scent of grilled chicken and Sarah's unease filled our kitchen. Our two children, 8-year-old Lily and 10-year-old Sam, were chattering about their day at school, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering over their father's new workshop. After they were in bed, Sarah sat across from me at the oak table I had refinished last winter, her brow furrowed. A view corridor easement. What does that even mean? She asked, tracing the wood grain with her finger. I slid the heavy binder of closing documents across the table. It means she's making things up. I opened it to a crisp, folded copy of the plat map for Lot 114 Ridgeview Estates. Section C. Our property was clearly outlined. All existing easements, a utility line at the far east border. A drainage swale near the road were marked with dotted lines. The back of our lot was a clean, unbroken boundary. See nothing, I said, and here are the CC&Rs I downloaded from the county records site. I flipped to the bookmarked page. GWAR 8.4.2, View Corridor Preservation. All lots designated as ridgeline parcels, lots 201-215, shall be subject to a perpetual, unobstructed view corridor easement, extending 15 feet from the rear property line. No structure, fence, or vegetation exceeding 6 feet in height may be erected within this easement. We're Lot 114, Sarah said, her voice a mix of relief and confusion. The ridgeline lots are on the other side of the neighborhood, up on the hill. She knows that. Why would she cite a rule that doesn't apply? Because it sounds official, I said, closing the binder. It's a tactic. She throws out legal-sounding jargon, and 99% of people get intimidated and just comply. They don't have their plat map sitting on the kitchen table. My meticulous nature, the very trait that made me a successful, if uninspired, project manager, was now my primary defense. I had files for everything: the house, the cars, the warranties for our kitchen appliances. The barn had its own expanding folder, filled with receipts, architectural drawings, the county permit, and the fresh survey from a firm called Boundary Line Solutions. So, what happens now? Sarah asked, wrapping her hands around a warm mug of tea. She said we'd get a notice. We will, and we'll respond. In writing. Through the proper channels, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We'll send a polite, formal letter with copies of the survey and the permit, pointing out that Section 8.4.2 does not apply to our lot. It will be a simple, factual correction of an administrative error. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew it wasn't an error. It was a declaration of war, fought with certified mail and procedural minutiae. The barn wasn't just a building. It was my declaration of independence from a world of cubicles and status reports. It was the future I was building for my family. A place where my work would be tangible and real. And Draw Ellingsworth was trying to tear it down before the first piece of restored furniture could even be carried across its threshold. The first official volley arrived 2 weeks later, on May 15th. It was not a simple letter. It was a thick, 9x12 envelope delivered by a mail carrier who required my signature. The return address was for Aspen Management. the third-party company that handled the HOA's administrative tasks. Inside, printed on heavy cardstock bearing the Ridgeview Estates letterhead, was a formal violation notice. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic aggression. The polite, almost friendly tone of a courtesy notice had been skipped entirely. This was step 2. It cited not only the fabricated Bar 8.4.2 violation, but also a new one, CCNR's, for 7.3 architectural harmony. A vague, catch-all clause that gave the board sweeping aesthetic control. The heritage red paint, the notice claimed, created a visually disruptive element that detracts from the uniform and tranquil character of the community. The remedy was stark. Within 30 days, I was to 1. Repaint the entirety of the barn structure in one of the 3 pre-approved earthen tones. 2. Submit a retroactive architectural change request application for the barn's construction. 3. Include with the application a non-refundable processing fee of $250. The final paragraph was the hammer blow. Failure to comply by the deadline of June 15th will result in the levying of fines in the amount of $25 per day. As outlined in the association's duly adopted fine policy, unpaid fines and fees may result in the placement of a lien on the property. I read it twice, then a third time. They were creating a paper trail, manufacturing a chain of non-compliance that would allow them to legally encumber my home. "This is insane," Sarah said, her voice tight with anxiety as she read over my shoulder. "They can't just put a lien on our house over paint color." "They can, if they follow their process and we don't fight it," I said, the metallic thrumming in my chest returning. I spent the rest of the day drafting my response. It was polite, professional, and dense with facts. I cited the specific inapplicability of FAR 8.4.2, referencing my plat map, a copy of which was attached. I argued that FAR 7.3 was being applied arbitrarily to an outbuilding on a non-member lot. I included a copy of my county permit and the final inspection report. I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested, to the official address of Aspen Management, with a carbon copy to the HOA's listed mailing address. For a week, there was silence. Then, another certified letter arrived. It was a notice of hearing. "You are hereby summoned to appear before the Board of Directors." It read, "To discuss the ongoing violations at Lot 114. The hearing was scheduled for June 1st at 7:00 p.m. This was the next step in their due process charade. They were going to give me my day in court before finding me guilty. The hearing was not held in the spacious community clubhouse ballroom, which was reserved for yoga classes and neighborhood potlucks. Instead, a small sign directed me to a stuffy, windowless back office, a supply closet repurposed into a meeting room. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and stale coffee. Draw sat at the head of a rickety folding table, flanked by Gerald Finney and an elderly woman with kind, nervous eyes whom I recognized as Mrs. Langston from down the street, a representative from Aspen Management, a young woman who looked barely out of college, sat in the corner, typing silently on a laptop. My carefully prepared notes and documents, neatly organized in a leather portfolio, felt foolishly formal in the cramped, airless room. Dr. called the meeting to order with a rap of her pen on the table. "This hearing is convened to address the unresolved violations at Lot 114, owned by Mr. Mason Truble. Mr. Truble, you have 5 minutes to present your case." I stood and laid out my evidence as clearly and concisely as I could: the plat map, the inapplicable covenant, the county permits. I spoke about my property's grandfathered status. I ended by stating that the board had no legal authority to compel me to repaint my barn or pay a fee. When I finished, Dra did not look at my documents. She looked at the Aspen Management representative. Has the board's legal counsel reviewed the association's authority in this matter? The young woman glanced up from her screen. Yes, Ms. Ellingsworth. Counsel affirmed that Section 7 regarding architectural control provides the board with broad discretion to maintain community-wide aesthetic standards. It was a classic misdirection. They ignored my specific, evidence-based argument about the easement and fell back on the vague, subjective harmony clause. Thank you, Draw said. She turned to me. Mr. Truble, the board appreciates your input. However, the consistent application of our standards is paramount to protecting the investment of all homeowners. The visual integrity of Ridgeview cannot be compromised. She called for a vote. Gerald's hand went up immediately. Mrs. Langston hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting toward me with a flicker of sympathy before her hand slowly rose as well. Draw's own hand shot up last, a punctuation mark on the proceedings. The motion carries. 3-0, she declared. The violations are upheld. A fine of $100 is hereby imposed, effective immediately. Further fines of $25 per day will accrue until the property is brought into compliance. This hearing is adjourned. I stood there, portfolio in hand, as they gathered their papers. I hadn't just been dismissed. I had been procedurally nullified. I walked out into the cool night air, the injustice of it a bitter taste in my mouth. I had played by the rules, presented the facts, and been summarily ignored. The system wasn't broken. It was designed to work this way. I realized then that fighting on their terms, within their sham proceedings, would never work. I needed a different strategy. I needed to go on the offensive. My first call the next morning was to my cousin, Colleen. She was a real estate lawyer in the city, sharp and blessedly unsentimental. I explained the situation, from the initial inspection to the sham hearing. Classic playbook, she said after I finished, the sound of her typing clicking in the background. They're building a case for foreclosure. They'll let the fines accumulate, have their attorney file a lien, and, in a year or two, they can legally force a sale to satisfy the debt. It's a slow-motion strong-arm. But it's all based on a lie. I protested. The easement doesn't exist on my property. Doesn't matter, she said flatly. They have a vote recorded in their minutes. That's all their lawyer needs to see. Right now. It's your word against their official records. You can't win a procedural war without ammunition. You need your own paper trail. What kind of ammunition? Their own documents. Colleen said, under state law, as a homeowner in the vicinity, you have the right to inspect and copy the association's official records. I'm sending you a template for a formal records request. Ask for everything the last 3 years of board meeting minutes, all financial statements, budgets, check registers, and copies of all contracts with vendors, and specifically request all correspondence, including emails, related to Lot 114. Be polite, be formal, and send it certified mail. Her advice was a lifeline. It shifted my perspective from defense to investigation. That afternoon, I typed up the letter, citing the relevant state statute and the HOA's own governing documents, CC&Rs, Part 11.2 Inspection of Books and Records. I mailed it before picking up the kids from school. Later that week, seeking a bit of perspective, I went for a walk and found my neighbor, Colonel Miller, meticulously pruning the rose bushes that lined his driveway. He was a retired Army colonel, a man who radiated a quiet, unshakable integrity. He had seen petty tyrants before. Heard you had a run-in with the Queen, he said without looking up from a particularly stubborn branch. You could say that, I replied. He snipped the branch with a satisfying crack. Let me tell you a story. About 5 years ago, a young family moved in down the block. The Patels. Good people. Their daughter had a severe peanut allergy. They put a small, tasteful sign at the end of their driveway. Just said, "Please, no food products beyond this point. Thank you." A week later, Draw cited them for an unapproved sign. They explained the situation, but Draw wouldn't budge. Said it set a bad precedent. She fined them every day for a month until they finally gave up and took it down. They sold their house and moved away 6 months later. The colonel finally looked at me, his gaze steady. Draw doesn't care about rules. She cares about compliance. Total, unquestioning compliance. The sign wasn't the problem. The Patel's refusal to immediately obey was the problem. Be careful. Son, she doesn't fight fair. She'll try to make it personal. He paused, inspecting a rosebud. Let her build her own gallows. Your job is to calmly hand her the rope, not tie the knot. 2 weeks later, on June 15th, a thick box arrived from Aspen Management. It was the records I had requested. Sarah and I spent the entire evening spreading the contents across our dining room table. It was a mountain of paper bank statements, invoices for landscaping, minutes from dozens of meetings. At first, it just seemed like mundane, poorly organized bookkeeping. But then we saw it. The minutes for the board meetings from March, April, and May of this year were different. Under the agenda item, New Business, several paragraphs on each page were completely blacked out with a thick, impenetrable marker. Beside the redaction, a small typed note read, "Redacted pending legal review." The title of the redacted section was the same in all 3 sets of minutes, Ridgeline Development Proposal. My heart hammered against my ribs. Ridgeline, I said aloud. The lots with the view corridor easement. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Colleen. Her voice was electric. "Mason, are you sitting down? I've been digging through the County Planning Commission's database. A developer called Viridian Homes filed a preliminary zoning application 3 months ago. Guess what for? High-density condos," I said, my eyes still fixed on the redacted minutes. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "How did you know?" "It's in the minutes, redacted, but the title is here. Ridgeline Development Proposal." My God, she breathed. It's bigger than I thought. The development is for that big patch of undeveloped green space directly behind your street. According to the application, they need a utility and access easement, and the most logical path for it runs straight through the backyards of the properties on your road, the ones that aren't in the HOA. To get that easement, they need to control the land. Draw isn't just trying to annex you for dues. She's trying to force you and your neighbors to sell. The whole ugly picture snapped into focus. The harassment, the fake easement violation, the refusal to listen to reason. My barn wasn't the target. It was the first domino. She was manufacturing violations to rack up fines and file liens, making life so difficult and expensive that the non-member homeowners would be forced to sell their properties cheap, likely to a holding company controlled by the developer. "And I bet my license," Colleen added, her voice hard as steel, "that Draw Ellingsworth is getting a very generous kickback from Viridian Homes for clearing the path." The fight was no longer about a can of red paint. It was about my home, my neighbors' homes, and a conspiracy of greed hiding behind the bylaws of a suburban homeowners association. The retaliation for my records request was swift and brutal. On June 25th, another envelope arrived, this one from a downtown law firm, Patterson, Duke and Sterling. It was a formal cease and desist letter, printed on heavy linen paper that felt heavy with menace. The language was dense and terrifying. It accused me of a campaign of harassment against volunteer board members and, more alarmingly, of tortious interference with the association's prospective economic advantage. It claimed my records request was a bad faith effort to disrupt a sensitive and confidential business negotiation that would benefit the entire community. It demanded I immediately withdraw my baseless appeals and cease all communication with the board, or they would seek a temporary restraining order and pursue litigation for damages. This was a SLAPP suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. It was designed to intimidate, to bury me in legal fees until I surrendered. That night, the tension in our house was unbearable. Sarah read the letter, her face growing paler with each paragraph. "Mason, this is a real law firm," she said, her voice trembling. "They're threatening to sue us. We can't afford this. We can't fight a team of corporate lawyers." "It's a bluff, Sarah, a scare tactic." "Is it?" she shot back, her fear turning to anger. "We have a mortgage. We have kids. All our savings are tied up in this house and your business plan. Is your pride, is that barn, worth losing everything?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't wrong. The comfortable bubble of our suburban life had been pierced, and she was terrified. For the first time, I felt a tremor of genuine fear myself. What if I was wrong? What if I pushed too hard and brought our whole world crashing down? We argued, our voices rising in the quiet of our kitchen, the ugly, panicked words hanging in the air, long after we fell into a wounded silence. The next day, I transferred $2,500 from our savings account to a local attorney Colleen had recommended. It was a retainer, just to have him review the letter and advise me. The transfer confirmation email felt like a surrender. The money, earmarked for a new band, saw for the workshop, was gone. Spent not on building my future, but on defending it. I felt utterly alone. The turning point came from the most unexpected source. A few days later, a plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address. My name was typed on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of the unredacted minutes from the April board meeting. A yellow sticky note was attached. She didn't tell the whole board what she was doing. Some of us are not on board with this. Check the payments to Apex Consulting. The whistleblower. Someone on the inside had seen the injustice and decided to act. I scanned the unredacted text. It was damning. It detailed a private meeting between Draw and two representatives from Viridian Homes. It mentioned a facilitator's fee to be paid to the HOA upon successful rezoning, most critically. It documented Duara, assuring the developers that she had a strategy in place to secure compliance from the holdout properties on Chestnut Street. I was a holdout property on Chestnut Street. Then I cross-referenced the financial statements. Sure enough, over the last 6 months, there were 3 payments of $5,000 each, totaling $15,000 made from the HOA's general fund to a vendor named Apex Consulting, LLC, for community planning services. It was a huge amount for a small HOA. A quick search on the state's business registry database gave me the final piece of the puzzle. Apex Consulting, LLC was registered just 8 months ago. The sole registered agent and owner was a man named Robert Finney. A deeper social media search brought me to a public photo album from a family wedding last year. There was Dr. beaming, her arm linked with a portly, anxious-looking man. The caption read, "So happy to celebrate with my wonderful brother-in-law, Robert Finney." Gerald Finney's brother. The payments weren't for consulting. They were kickbacks being laundered through her loyal crony's family. The annual homeowners meeting was scheduled for July 15th, held in the cavernous, brightly lit gymnasium of the local middle school. Under the bylaws, any homeowner could request a 5-minute slot on the agenda if they submitted their topic in writing 2 weeks in advance. I had submitted mine a review of ACC transparency and procedural fairness. DRA couldn't legally deny it. The gym was packed with over 100 homeowners, a mix of curious, apathetic, and aggrieved residents sitting on uncomfortable folding chairs. At the front, Dr. Gerald and Mrs. Langston sat at a long table draped in a green cloth. A large digital timer was projected onto the screen behind them, its red numbers glowing WO 500. Dr. A gave a smug, self-congratulatory opening speech about rising property values and the success of the new pet waste management initiative. Then, she introduced me. Next, on the agenda, Mr. Mason Traubel has requested time to discuss the board's architectural review process. Her tone implied it was a trivial matter, a minor nuisance to be tolerated. I walked to the podium, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm. I connected my laptop to the projector. The timer started its silent, relentless countdown. 04:59. My first slide was a beautiful, sun-drenched photo of my barn. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Mason Traubel. Many of you know me as the owner of the unapproved Red Barn on Chestnut Street." A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. 04:30. My next slides came in quick succession. A high-resolution scan of my county building permit, a copy of my final inspection approval, and then the official plat map of my lot, with our property lines highlighted in yellow. I used the laser pointer to trace the boundary. The board cited me for violating Section 8.4.2 of View Corridor Easement. As you can see from the official county record, no such easement exists on my property. The board was formally notified of this fact in writing on May 16th, and again, in person at a hearing on June 1st. U315. I clicked to the next slide. It was a scan of the redacted minutes I had received from Aspen Management. The black boxes were stark and accusatory. "This is what the board provided to me when I requested the official records," I said, "but transparency is crucial for a community to thrive." I took a breath and clicked again. The unredacted version filled the screen. A collective gasp went through the room. This is the full version, provided to me by a concerned resident who believed homeowners have a right to know the truth. I read the key passage aloud, the one about Draw's meeting with Viridian Homes and her strategy to secure compliance from the holdout properties. Null devi no null. The room was buzzing now. Draw was whispering furiously to Gerald. I advanced to the next slide, a simple flowchart showing the $15,000 in payments from the HOA's operating fund to Apex Consulting, LLC. The board has spent $15,000 of our money on a consulting firm this year, I said. The next slide showed the LLC's registration, with Robert Finney's name clearly visible. The final slide in the sequence was the wedding photo of Draw and her brother-in-law. The silence in the gym was absolute. The accusation needed no further explanation. It was embezzlement, plain and simple. Dural 45. I had one more piece of evidence, a document from my whistleblower showing what appeared to be Mrs. Langston's forged signature on an approval for one of the consulting payments. I had a slide ready to go. I glanced at the front table. Mrs. Langston was staring at the screen, her face ashen, her hands trembling. She looked confused, horrified, and utterly manipulated. She was a victim, not a conspirator. In that split second, I made a choice. The Colonel's words came back to me. Let her build her own gallows. My fight was with Draw and her corruption, not with the gentle, elderly woman she had duped. I skipped the slide. The records show, I said, choosing my words carefully, that the board was consistently provided with incomplete or misleading information by its president. leading them to approve expenditures that they may not have fully understood. I gave Mrs. Langston a shield, a way out. It was an act of grace in a battle that had shown none. 0005. This was never about a barn, I concluded, my voice ringing with conviction. It was about using our own rules and our own money against us for personal profit. I urge you to ask yourselves, is this the order and beauty we want for our community? The timer hit down and beeped softly. I stepped away from the podium. For a heartbeat. The gym was silent. Then, a single person began to clap. It was Colonel Miller. He rose to his feet, his applause slow and deliberate. Then another person stood, and another, until the entire room was on its feet, the sound of their applause washing over the front table like a tidal wave. Dra Ellingsworth sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Her reign was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive, before the applause had even died down. Colonel Miller, his voice booming with military authority, strode to the microphone. He made a formal motion from the floor, as permitted by the bylaws in an annual meeting, to suspend the current board of directors pending an independent forensic audit. The motion was seconded by a dozen voices at once. It passed with a thunderous roar of aye. The representative from Aspen Management, a young woman whose face had gone from bored to terrified over the course of my 5-minute presentation, quickly took the podium, reading from a statement on her phone that she was clearly receiving via text. She announced that her company would cooperate fully with any investigation and, effective immediately, was recommending the board step aside to ensure a transparent process. She was distancing her company from the liability as fast as she could. The next day, a local news outlet that had picked up the story reported that Viridian Homes had issued a press release, citing unforeseen community discord and a reevaluation of project feasibility. They were officially withdrawing their zoning application. The threat to my street was gone. In the weeks that followed, the quiet, manicured streets of Ridgeview Estates became a hive of activity. A temporary committee, headed by Colonel Miller, was formed to oversee the HOA's affairs. They hired a forensic accounting firm, and the discoveries were grim. The audit confirmed not just the payments to Dra's brother-in-law, but a pattern of embezzlement stretching back years. Shell companies, fake invoices for phantom landscaping projects, inflated insurance premiums with kickbacks from the broker. It was a small-scale cartel run from a supply closet. Dra Ellingsworth, Gerald Finney, and Robert Finney were removed from their positions and soon found themselves facing not just civil suits from the HOA's insurance company, but a criminal investigation by the district attorney's office for wire fraud and embezzlement. All fines and liens levied against my property were formally rescinded and expunged from the records, and a check for my $2,500 legal retainer, reimbursed by the HOA's directors and officers' insurance policy, arrived in my mailbox. A special election was held in September to form a new, permanent board. Colonel Miller was elected president by a landslide, to my own surprise, and, after much persuasion from Sarah, who now saw the fight as a necessary battle for our home's integrity, I reluctantly agreed to serve as the new chair of the Architectural Control Committee. My first official act was to draft a new guideline clarifying that outbuildings were not subject to the residential color palette, provided they were maintained in good condition. One afternoon, while sorting through the boxes of disorganized files left in the cramped HOA office, I found a dusty banker's box tucked away in a corner, labeled Ellingsworth, Personal. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside, beneath old tax returns and appliance manuals, was a worn manila folder with a single word on the tab: Trouble. My blood ran cold. I opened it. It didn't contain anything about me or my barn. It was filled with yellowed newspaper clippings from 20 years ago. The headlines were about a catastrophic structural failure at a new condominium project on the other side of the county. A balcony had collapsed, and the subsequent investigation had revealed widespread use of substandard materials and fraudulent inspection reports. The lead building inspector for the county at the time, the one whose meticulous investigation had uncovered the fraud and red-tagged the entire project, forcing the developer into bankruptcy, was a man named David Trubel, my father. He had passed away a decade ago, but I remembered how proud he was of his unwavering commitment to the building code, a commitment that had made him few friends among cost-cutting contractors. The developer, who lost everything, whose company had been dissolved in disgrace, was Ellingsworth Construction, owned and operated by Draw's late husband. Clipped to the front of the articles was a small, handwritten note on a piece of faded stationery. The handwriting was Draw's. It read, "They take from us. We take from them. It's only fair." A profound, chilling understanding settled over me. This entire, months-long ordeal, the lies, the harassment, the attempt to steal my home, it wasn't just about greed. It was a cold, patient, deeply personal revenge, misaimed at the son of the man she blamed for her family's ruin. My barn was never the reason. It was just the excuse, a convenient target for a grievance she had nursed for 2 decades. I sat there for a long time in the quiet office, the musty smell of old paper in the air. I thought about releasing the information, about showing everyone the true, twisted root of her obsession. But what purpose would it serve? She was already disgraced, her power broken, her reputation ruined. Revealing this would only feel like kicking an opponent who was already down. It would be my own act of vengeance, and I was not her. I closed the folder, placed it back in the box, and pushed it into the corner. Some stories didn't need to be told. The battle was over. We had won, not by sinking to her level, but by rising above it, armed with truth, procedure, and the quiet courage of a community that had finally found its voice. I walked out of the office and locked the door behind me, leaving the ghosts of the old regime to the dust and the shadows. I walked home under a clear autumn sky, the neighborhood peaceful around me. In the distance, I could see the roof of my barn, its heritage red paint gleaming in the late afternoon sun. It was more than a workshop now. It was a landmark, a quiet monument to the simple, powerful idea that a person has the right to build something of their own, on their own land, in peace.